Like the you have to find your own purpose argument was one that was put forth very strongly by Nietzsche when, after he announced the death of God. He said that people would have to revalue good and evil and to come up with their own definitions of what constituted morality. And like the Nietzschean criticism of Christianity is about as deep as it got, with the possible exception of Dostoevsky. But there's one of the things I really liked about Carl Jung, and that's really struck me as irrefutable, is Jung's fundamental response to Nietzsche was that, well, let's take the argument of the death of God to its logical conclusion, and then let's investigate the idea that human beings have to be the creators of their own systems of meaning. Jung's idea, and this was also the case for the other psychoanalysts, was that's just palpably false, because it turns out that you're not the sort of creature that can create your own meaning. You're the sort of creature that has to discover the meaning that already exists encoded within you. And part of that is that you're not your own slave. And so it's a critique not only of the idea that you can will your own destiny in its entirety while completely ignoring the fact that you have a nature, but it's also a profound critique of the socialist utopian ideas that human beings can be molded in any way that they see fit. And so Jung's objection was something like, well, try to generate a meaning on your own out of nothing, and then try to force yourself to follow it and see how far you get. What you'll find is that you rebel. Your own nature rebels in every possible way against the arbitrary imposition of of just any old moral framework on the manner in which you're going to conduct yourself. And so,
yeah, I think it's such a deep critique, and I think that it's so telling, because what we've come up with is the substitute for what you're talking about, which is this acknowledgement that there is a universal purpose that we ought to be aspiring to discover, that it's actually out there. There's a purpose out there, and it's our job to uncover it as opposed to self-creating it. That is a really deep divide in America, I think in the West generally, because what people have said is, okay, we finally realized that we do need this thing called purpose, right? We can't just be hedonists all the time. Drugs and sex aren't going to cut it. We're actually going to need to come up with some purpose.
Yeah, they're hydras.
Right, but we're not going to be able to. But at the same time, we don't want a government or a society or a church or a community forcing down its universal perception of values on us. And so therefore, our happy medium is going to be, you define your own freedom, you define your own rights, and you define your own view of the universe. Well, that is always going to just devolve into this pathetic sort of solipsism that can never be escaped from, and doesn't provide happiness anyway. I mean, the people who quote unquote define their own meaning are some of the least happy people that you will ever meet, because they don't believe that they're in consonance with anything larger. If you're looking into yourself, right, yourself is not that big. There's not that much there, right? There has to be something beyond you, whether you find it in God or whether you find it in a community or in nature. There has to be something that speaks to you beyond the guts that exist inside you, or you're just examining your own intestines.
I think, too, that you can make a strong scientific case, and this is something I never got to in my discussions with Sam Harris, is you can make a strong scientific case for the reality of meaning let's just call it for the reality of meaning. You might think about it as a psychological reality, but you can think about it as a metaphysical or a biological reality too, because as far as I can tell, and there's good neurological evidence for this, your brain is adapted to two modes of being. And one mode of being is that mode that obtains when you're where you know what you're doing and you know what's going on. So you could call that explored territory, let's say. And there's another mode of being that is that which obtains when you don't know what's going on, when you're in unexplored territory. You could say, well, animals since the beginning of time have adapted to some combination of explored and unexplored territory. And that's roughly akin to known and unknown, which I think is what's symbolized in the yin-yang symbol. And as far as I can tell, the sense of meaning that people experience that's spontaneous and deep is an indication that they're functioning well in explored territory, but simultaneously increasing their capacity to deal with unexplored territory. So it's like the zone of proximal development, or even the flow states that Csikszentmihalyi has talked about. But see, the best thing to be is where things are going well for you, but also where you're expanding the capacity of things to go well for you simultaneously. And then you can add to that the fact that that's not going to be solipsistic, because we live in a social world. If I'm pursuing something that's deeply meaningful, then if things are constructed fortunately, then I'm going to be pursuing something that's very good for me now, and me later, and me deep into the future. At the same time, I'm pursuing something that's good for you now, and you later, and you deep into the future. And I believe that that sense of deep engagement that envelops people in fortunate periods of their lives is actually a neurological signal that the layers of being are stacked on top of one another properly, and that you're oriented properly within them. And that it's see, to me, I've often thought that the most real thing is pain. And then you might say, well, if there's an antidote to pain, that would be something that would be even more real than pain. And it seems to me that the sense of meaning that I'm talking about here, that's associated with this sense of ultimate responsibility, is an antidote to pain, and therefore is something that's most real. I don't see anything. You can make a metaphysical claim about that, and that's perfectly reasonable, but you don't have to. You can make a bloody hardcore scientific claim for that, and I think it's extremely difficult to refute. Why wouldn't we have?
I tend to agree with that, and I think that you referencing the flow state, that's something that where we are happiest, right, from scientific research, is in that flow state, and that flow state is exactly what we're talking about now. This feeling that you have mastery over your capacity to explore the unexplored, and that the unexplored is worth exploring, right? I mean, that's the other thing, is that what drives you to explore the unexplored. It's not just that you get up in the morning and you feel like wandering outside into the forest. There's some of that, but I think some of it is that you feel like there's an actual necessity for you as a human being to do that. There's a moral duty for you to try and conquer new worlds. And adding the moral layer, the moral impetus on top of, I just have a decision to go out and explore unexplored territory, is what I think allows civilization to create rather than destroy. Now, I've talked a lot.